Hello everyone, and welcome to this Diablo 3 dungeon guide for the Crusader Armor of Akkhan set. We'll be going over how to set up your character, and I'll also explain how to complete both primary dungeon objectives. Keep watching until the end to see a full playthrough of the entire set dungeon with additional tips. To get started, let's first take a look at the set bonuses so we'll know how to gear out our character. This set revolves heavily around the Chak-Akkhan's champion skill. While the skill is active, you deal increased damage, take less damage from enemies, and all of your abilities have reduced resource cost. Chak-Akkhan's champion has a base cooldown of 90 seconds, and although the 4-piece set bonus cuts the cooldown in half, we'll still need to take some additional cooldown reduction to ensure we can keep the skill active at all times. The set bonuses technically allow you the freedom to use any damage dealing skill in the Crusader arsenal. However, one of the primary dungeon objectives requires grouping up enemies and tagging them with the Condemn skill, so we'll mainly use it as our main damage dealing attack in this build. Considering all of this, cooldown reduction and toughness are the main priorities for the gearing and skills setup. In this setup, here are the recommended items. The bonus damage offered by the 6-piece set bonus is relatively low, so we'll need to take a couple of items to further buff the damage of the Condemn skill. Without these items, you may not have enough damage output to complete the dungeon within the time limit. Several items provide extra cooldown reduction. This will mainly keep the Chak-Akkhan's champion buff active at all times, but will also allow you to use your other mobility and defensive skills more frequently. Illusory boots offer a tremendous quality of life improvement for the grouping attempts, allowing you to more easily group up enemies and avoid getting trapped and taking unnecessary hits. If you need to tone down your damage output, then consider removing the Emerald from the weapon socket, and consider removing Bane of the Trapped and Bane of the Powerful, and using other defensive-related legendary gems in their place, such as Esoteric Alteration and Molten Wildebeest Gizzard. And here are the skills. Both Chak-Akkhan's champion and Condemn are mandatory for the dungeon. The rune choice for Condemn, Vacuum, is virtually mandatory for the grouping objective. It sucks monsters in towards you and will help ensure you hit the most monsters possible in a given area with each Condemn cast. Laws of Valor with the Unstoppable Force rune combined with the Long Arm of the Law passive skill will help you maintain Wrath resource, to be able to cast back-to-back Condemns as needed to kill off enemies. Use Slash and Iron Skin on an as-needed basis to regenerate resource and get additional toughness during grouping attempts. Now let's go over the dungeon objectives. The first primary dungeon objective is to use the Condemn skill on 10 different enemies simultaneously 10 times. To complete this objective, you'll need to group up enemies in packs of 10 or more and cast Condemn. It's important to know that there's a 3-second delay between the time when you cast Condemn to when it will actually do damage to enemies, so you'll want to have sufficient toughness to stand within a group and take hits. Remember that Chak-Akkhan's champion provides toughness bonuses, so make sure it's active when you are performing a large grouping attempt. Your basic cast sequence is to first cast Steed Charge to run into the middle of a monster pack, then make sure Chak-Akkhan's champion and Laws of Valor are activated to receive their benefits. Then activate the Iron Skin skill if needed for some additional toughness, and hit Condemn. With the Vacuum rune selected, Condemn will suck in monsters over the 3-second period before it deals damage. During this time, attack with the Slash skill to regenerate Wrath resource and to benefit from its additional toughness buff. Depending on things like the quality of your items and the level of your legendary gems, you may need to tone down your damage output to avoid killing enemies too quickly before Condemn can trigger. You can do this by performing actions like unequipping damage-dealing legendary gems or using non-optimized gear pieces. Instead of increasing damage output, opt to increase toughness so you can stand in the middle of a monster pack while Condemn sucks monsters in and eventually triggers to tag the group of enemies. The second primary dungeon objective is to kill 150 enemies while imbued with Chak-Akkhan's champion. This objective is as straightforward as it sounds. Just kill monsters while the Chak-Akkhan's champion buff is active to make progress. If you have enough cooldown reduction with your build, it's easy to keep this buff active throughout the entire dungeon. Just make sure to refresh it periodically when its cooldown is expired. If you don't have enough cooldown reduction, use the downtime between Chak-Akkhan's champion casts to kill off single enemies or explore sections of the dungeon that don't have large groupings of monsters while you wait on the cooldown to reset, and save the larger groups of enemies to kill while you have the Chak-Akkhan's champion buff active. Next, let's take a look at the dungeon map. This dungeon has a fairly straightforward layout. The best approach is to perform one large loop around the map, serpentining your way back and forth as you go to make sure you uncover all of the minimap. Keep an eye out for the skulls on the minimap and try not to leave any stragglers behind. There are no areas to focus on for the grouping attempts for the first primary dungeon objective. Groups of 10 plus enemies can be found just about anywhere in the dungeon. Just try to be patient when grouping to ensure you allow enough time for enemies to come towards you first before you activate Condemn. Many of the monster packs will contain right at around 10 enemies, so missing one monster in an area can cause you to fail a grouping attempt. When approaching the larger open areas, there may be very high monster density where it's possible to easily tag 20 plus enemies in the same pack. In these locations, be disciplined and try not to pull too many enemies in the same group unnecessarily, as you may rob monsters from subsequent grouping attempts. So now that you have the setup and you know how to approach the dungeon, let's head to it. Go to Act 3, then to the Bastion's Keep Stronghold waypoint. In town, head east and enter the Armory. The dungeon entrance is in the small room to the southeast. And next we'll look at the playthrough. For this run, I went with pretty barebones gear to demonstrate techniques. I had to equip both legendary powers that provide buffs to the Condemn skill to have enough damage output to complete the dungeon within the time limit. Any additional items or stats that you get, consistent with the recommendations earlier, will give you a much easier time completing the dungeon. Once inside the dungeon, head out looking for a grouping of 10 plus enemies. If you don't see a large group in this initial area, then go ahead and kill off any single enemies or smaller groups before moving on. Remember to keep Akarat's champion active at all times. When you see a larger group, use Iron Skin to get a toughness boost while you run around letting enemies rush towards you. When you have a healthy amount of monsters close to you, hit Condemn and wait 3 seconds. Then, look for the next group. Kill off any single enemies if you don't see high density in the area. If you see medium-sized groups with less than 10 monsters, you can try to coax them up with other enemies in the vicinity, but it's usually acceptable to just kill them off and move on. You'll generally have plenty of grouping opportunities in other locations. Be very careful near elites if you do not have high toughness. They can really pack a punch, so stay on the move to avoid their big swings, and just continually cast Condemn while circling around them to take them down. Remember to keep the Laws of Valor skill active when you're casting Condemn to reduce its resource cost. Here's another group. Hit Condemn to suck them in, and then try to group up residual enemies with others nearby. Cast Slash to get some extra toughness while you wait for Condemn to deal damage. Illusory Boots makes grouping much easier, since you won't get trapped as Condemn sucks monsters towards you, and you will have the freedom to move about and ensure all nearby enemies get sucked into the group. If you don't have Illusory Boots equipped, you can use Steed Charge to move through enemies, to reposition yourself to hit more enemies at once with Condemn, or to avoid taking fatal damage. Just keep repeating the same cast sequence. Steed Charge forward to a new area. As soon as you see enemies, try to group them up with Condemn, and then clear any residual monsters before you move on. Do not assign a follower for this dungeon. They will just get in the way and interfere with your grouping attempts. Mainly follow the outer perimeter around as you're traveling through the map, but make sure you check the interior perimeter as you go along to ensure you don't leave behind any stragglers. Condemn can be cast while you're on the move, so get into the habit of not standing still. This will help you avoid taking unnecessary damage or getting trapped in monster packs. Try to run circles around packs when grouping them up, and try to run circles around enemies when you're killing them off with Condemn. And there, both primary dungeon objectives are completed. Once you're done with the objectives, don't change anything about the approach. Keep Akarat's champion active and keep running their monsters to cast Condemn. Just a few monsters left. And we're done. Good luck trying to finish this one. If you enjoyed the guide and would like to see more content, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.